This is Meghan Fitz-James. I'd like to extend a big thank you to Savim for her wonderful job translating that December 21st, 2013 TNT Haber news clip, which was done in Turkish and Russian. And she was wonderfully spontaneous in accepting that responsibility to bring that, what we were seeing, to life.
Were you able to conduct any research and find out any information about what was going on with the Eagle Hunters of Kazakhstan during the communist period and or during Stalin's reign of terror?
Yeah, and this is obviously, again, it's from my research of other people's research, or finding out things through research, not generating this thought at all, but I think it's really interesting. I found some quotes from a link called Kazakh Eagle Hunting Facts and Details. It's on a site that's easily findable through Google. And on it, there's a section called Eagle Hunting in Kazakh Culture. And there's a quote that really, to my mind, gives a wider context as to why there are more eagle hunters actively participating in Western Mongolia than in Kazakhstan nowadays, and also what the art actually means to the so-called Kazakh nation. It gives a perspective that's entirely missing in the filmmaking, media marketing of the Eagle Huntress film. And I'll just read it to you now. So, quote, the winner of one competition in Ysslestyne in the early 2000s was a 14-year-old girl named Makpala Drazakova, who defeated men three or four times her age. She told Reuters, quote, "My father taught me the art of eagle hunting. This is not only for men," end quote. Eagle hunting was largely banned during Soviet rule, and the tradition would have disappeared altogether had it not been preserved by ethnic Kazakhs in China and in Mongolia, where Ysslestyne lives. Mm-hmm. More than 1 million Kazakhs took their skills to the graves during a Soviet-inflicted famine in the 1930s, when Joseph Stalin's forced collectivization campaign erased entire villages in Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Russia. Quote, "Hunger, repression, collectivization. People had no time to worry about their egos." This was a quote from a man named Yepimez Elimkhanov, a government official in charge of reviving national sporting activities. Quote, "It was a tragedy, but the tradition is coming back. Our sons and daughters have inherited it," he said. And here's another one from a woman named Maria Golovnina and her December 6, 2009 story. Quote, "Many in Kazakhstan see eagle hunting as a symbol of their nation's nomadic past and a throwback to an oft-romanticized era before these steppes turned into a geopolitical battleground between competing regional powers of Russia and China. 2 decades of economic growth that followed Kazakhstan's independence from Moscow's rule in 1991 have also created a generation of young Kazakhs whose search for a new identity has led to them to look deeper into history. Quote, "In Soviet days, all of this was forgotten because everyone had to believe in communism," said Dinara Serbayeva. I'm sorry, I don't say her name properly, but she runs an eagle hunting museum in the village of Nura.
Who were the carriers of the traditions that are helping to reinform and reinstate the traditions among the Kazakh eagle hunters and people?
Well, I think there's always been a continuity of the older eagle hunters. They just kept going with it to the best of their ability, especially, as I say, those who are living in Western Mongolia, where the tradition is so-called like it's best preserved there. But it's definitely the men who've carried it forward as a tradition, and that would be my understanding is that it's been the older men who've been continually teaching the younger people and so forth.
You know, I remember a while back when we were talking, you were discussing some of the ethnocentric posturing and writings of the film reviewers for the Eagle Huntress.
It's pretty upsetting reading some of the things that I read. Reading about the film and a film critique and these sort of remarks that I was reading, especially in light of what I know about the filmmaking, media marketing, and the filmmaking process for this film. So, but before I go on, maybe I can ask you, Jan, can you give the listeners, and me, your definition as an ethnographer, what ethnocentrism means? Or
Ethnocentrism is either the belief in the inherent superiority of one's own ethnic group or culture, or sometimes it's a tendency to view alien groups or cultures from the perspective of one's own.
Okay, and that's my understanding too. So I found 3 quotes from 3 different The Eagle Huntress reviewers that strike me as really ethnocentric. Number 1 was by a woman, I believe it's a woman, Anya Fas, spelled A-N-J-E, last name spelled F-A-H-S. She wrote for the group of analysts.com, and was published in the Product Culture magazine, issue Q1 2017, published May 16, 2017.
Okay.
And just one line from her Eagle Huntress review said, quote, "Women are mostly admitted here to cook or, at best, for a possible interesting marriage match." End quote. That's one.
You're kidding.
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Admitted here being a loaded term.
Yes.
You're allowed to only have this, is how I read that.
Right.
I may be wrong,
Okay.
but that's what I read.
All right.
Number 2 was a man named David James, spelled J-A-M-E-S, wrote, quote, "Bell Riley cuts," that's Otto Bell, the director of the Eagle Huntress, "Riley cuts away," and I put ... "to a series of pompous tribal elders in ridiculous costumes." And then in brackets I write ... "You know, they belong to a calcified dogma and strictures of nomadic tradition on the steppes." The steppes being the stepped, S-T-E-P-P-E-S, of the area, the land of that area. And that was something that I found in, it was 6 months ago for WeGotThisCovered.com, a movie review site.
Okay.
Ridiculous costumes being the thing that jumped out at me. Pompous tribal elders. Ridiculous costumes.
Yes.
And the third example was by a man named Lucas Kuminski, spelled C-U-M-I-S-K-Y. He wrote for www.theupcoming.co in the UK, an Eagle Huntress movie review, dated December 12, 2016. He wrote, quote, "The male eagle hunters for whom gender bias is orthodoxy," in brackets, who are part of a culture which is archaic, has fixed gender roles, and feminism is taking hold in the mountains of Mongolia, end quote.
I can't.
Does this qualify as ethnocentrism?
I can't even comment. I don't even want to comment on the depth of ignorance I'm listening to.
Okay. Okay, so it wasn't just me having response to those statements.
No.
Okay.
No. But
well, thankfully, in wanting to do something about this, I went looking for some counter evidence to some of these statements, and that took some doing. I had to look online and see who had made some comments about the Eagle Huntress film in terms of the media marketing, and if there was any responses out there that I could find that were not just made by, just anybody, but people with academic backgrounds who actually had some cultural knowledge. Okay. And I found 3 fantastic examples, so I'd like to share those with you. The first is a quote from Tuya Shagdar.
Now, who's Tuya Shagdar?
Well, Tuya is a Mongolian graduate student in social anthropology at Cambridge University in the UK. It's a prestigious university in the UK. And a former lecturer at the Department of Social and Cultural Anthropology at the National University of Mongolia.
Wow.
And she provided a response to her impression of the media marketing of the Eagle Huntress. And it is a quote as follows, noting, of course, that they're in rural Mongolia where the Kazakhs live. It's not an isolated, she said, is not an isolated culture and place the way the filmmakers for the Eagle Huntress film are trying to depict. All remote regions in Mongolia have secondary schools and some even have universities. Women enjoy a wide range of freedom to get education and climb social ladders, if not actively encouraged to do so. Overall, I wish people would stop exoticizing people they do not know. It is unfair to portray Kazakhs in Mongolia as belonging to a backwards, patriarchal, and closed community that needs its, quote, backwardness broken down, end quote.
Wow, what a great statement. And we can only hope that people that are listening to this video hear this message loud and clear.
Exactly. And the second quote I have is from Kent Madden.
Okay, and who's Kent Madden and what is his background?
Kent Madden is the owner of Bujum Expeditions, which was established in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
He was the first U.S. outfitter to offer tourism in Mongolia.
Wow.
And he has 35 years experience doing so. His company offered so-called Eagle Hunter trips into Western Mongolia, into the Kazakh Eagle hunting community, during the actual hunting season, which is like the first snowfall around October, November through to the spring, right? So, he offered those tours to tourists, and he did this even before the Eagle Hunter Festival was established, which was in 2000. Right? So that was actually established as a point of culture, pride, and sharing, but also to extend the tourism season. It was like a two-pronged reason why that festival was established. So he is also the honorary consul of Mongolia for the Northern Rockies. So,
wow.
Yeah. I'll just abbreviate what he said, because there's a whole long quote actually that went into greater detail about other aspects of the film.
Okay.
And I found this quote under a YouTube review on the film itself. So what he said in particular was speaking to the depiction of the women of the nomadic culture and what they're capable of.
Okay.
Right? So he said, quote, "What I found most problematic was the suggestion that women in nomadic culture are too weak or get cold easily to do the, quote, tough work of hunting. Balls," he says. "Women, in brackets, and children, in traditional herding cultures do the vast majority of the really hard work. Milking, feeding, collecting dung, cooking, chopping wood, collecting wood, sewing, preserving milk and meat products, and rendering them, assembling and disassembling the gear, and so-called popping out children." This is a man standing here, popping out kids in less than ideal conditions, and essentially giving the impression how much vastly more dynamic than just having a child on each hip and stuck in the kitchen and or suppressed or held within the kitchen, which is the impression that earlier comment by Anja suggested, right?
Okay.
So. That was a great second quote.
Okay. Otto Bell, who is the filmmaker of the Eagle Huntress documentary, I know he's given a lot of reviews. I haven't had the opportunity to sit down and watch each and every single one, but can you give us an overall idea of what does the filmmaker say about the role of women? In these interviews he's been giving.
Well, I think, and this is how some of these reviewers may have come by their feelings, so I think it's important to cover off for sure. During Sundance, Otto Bell was interviewed, and he basically said or suggested that because of the geographic isolation, this is one of the least populated countries in the most remote areas of the least populated countries in the world. So the population density it means that you have to travel long distances to see other people, and unless you're going into one of the larger towns. Right? So people are, far away from each other. But he essentially says that because of the geographic isolation, that the men were, quote, not really aware of the women, what the women were capable of. Actually, that's not a direct quote, but I know that's what he said in an interview.
The culture that this focuses on, the society in which this young lady is being raised in. There are eagle hunters have existed there for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Is that it?
More than that.
That's kind of her background.
Before the days of Genghis Khan. Yeah.
Wow.
So
and where does she come into the story?
Well, it's it is the most remote part of the least populated country in the world.
Wow.
So with that isolation comes a certain kind of ignorance about the role of women, about what they can and can't do. It also leads to this kind of exquisite preservation, though, of their cultural traditions. But like I say, it's a double-edged sword. It also has a certain, women are seen as too fragile, too weak to take on this ancient tradition, and she's just entirely bucking that trend. I mean, she's changing history. Literally, the first woman in she's 13, but she's the first woman in 2,000 years of male-dominated history to ever take up this tradition.
Well, we are going to meet her right after this break. She has arrived, so we'll be right back after this commercial. Stay tuned for more on the Eagle Huntress.
So he's attributing the ignorance of the men's understanding of women to their isolation. But, that's he also said, essentially, in another interview that I looked at, he was talking about the women, generally their realm is in the kitchen, like taking care of the domestic things, sewing, cooking, and so taking care of kids. And that the men, their realm is outside doing the herding. And he never talks about the crossover activities,
Right.
That men sometimes will pitch in to help with, preparing parts of a meal. Or that women will be outside helping with some herding. Or doing outdoor things, getting their nails dirty, so-called being tomboys and so forth, right? That there isn't that depiction, even within the film itself. The women are only shown really in the kitchen, looking sheepishly up at Ysslestyne, where she's like, when she's talking, or at the festival and so forth. So the depiction of women within the film itself gives a very constrained sort of view of what the women do, So they're not depicted doing those other things. Static, and you don't see them doing those other things that Kent Madden had described during that earlier quote, right? So I believe that stereotypic impression is generated as a result.
Megan, I do remember you talking to me about your trip to Western Mongolia, and that when you were around the various nomadic women, whether they be Kazakh or Mongolian, that you always saw them outside working hard and carrying wood and pitching in with the real hard work that men do, and that it's rather curious when I do listen to the various interviews by the producers and director of the Eagle Huntress film, that they talk in such a way that they say that Ysslestyne is some sort of tomboy outlier, which is curious because I know they were on site during the filming of the movie, so I'm not quite sure what they were observing or not observing when they were actually visiting. Yeah, here's a good example. I grabbed this clip from Radio from Hell, which came out during the Sundance Film Festival, where Stacey Reese makes that point quite clearly.
You'll see this in the film where she's out doing chores with him and working with him and prefers to be outside with him and is a real tomboy.
She's a total tomboy.
Yeah.
And
What I found too is I also went further and asked a Kazakh Mongolian friend of mine, what is it about, like how much rural crossover is there? She says, well, really interestingly, in my culture, traditionally, if the eldest boy in the family is, goes off to join the army or gets sick or incapacitated or dies or whatever, is not around, and there's no other boy next in line in terms of age, take into account the abilities within the family, it would fall, the so-called boy role would fall to the oldest girl.
Wow.
So that she would take on the so-called boy role and do things that would typically be the boy, more helping, say, with the herding, or more helping, say, with more, more herding activities, for an example, or more things that would fall usually to the boys in the family.
Wow.
So that's traditionally within.
Interesting. Very interesting.
Sort of like what you can do to help.
Right. It just sounded like people needed to pitch in where they could kind of pitch in. That there, it was like a meritocracy in a way. I mean,
in a way,
informal meritocracy that
Well, it's a role-based culture,
Yeah.
as you know. Like you're working with different
with the Eastern Siberians, absolutely.
Right. So, you know, it's as I also dug a little deeper, and I found an interview because I was curious, like how much of a patriarchal culture is it?
right.
How much a matriarchal culture, or is it egalitarian, or is it somewhere between these things?
Right.
You know, because I wanted to inquire into that and learn about it. I haven't done a lot of studying about it, but I did find something really interesting. But
Right.
by the ex-minister of tourism, culture, and sport, Miss Oyengaro, her name was. And this is another, just as an aside, so she, in 2014, she was at a Berlin International Tourism Trade Fair, and she was giving a presentation, and I saw this video clip of her, and somebody, you know, she was saying that the nomadic culture in Mongolia, which has many similarities with the nomadic culture of Kazakh, they're sort of integrated and sort of adopted to each other's
Right.
thing. The main difference being around the belief systems with the Muslim, Kazakh, and Buddhist Mongolian traditionally, right?
Shamanic Buddhist.
And underpinning that
Right.
shamanic Buddhist shamanic and other influences, animism, things like that,
Right.
influencing it as well. She said, she just commented on nomadic culture.
And it's a very egalitarian culture. Children, adults alike, women, men alike, it's all, everybody's quite egalitarian. And there is historically not so many hierarchies, especially if you are in the countryside, your biggest counterpart is weather, your biggest counterpart is climate, but not each other, you know, so that's why there's a culture of being treating each other equally.
Hello, my name is Camilla. Of course, I join with the compliments about the beautiful display that we witnessed, as well as the fantastic presentation. Thank you very much for that. I just wanted to touch upon what you mentioned about gender and male and women being harmonized and just working together. But is it primarily patriarchal or matriarchal society, or is there no differentiation whatsoever? Thank you.
This is a very good question. Thank you for this question. And it's a International Women's Day approaching too. I'm also president of Democratic Women's Union in Mongolia, so I touch on gender issues a lot. And I'm very happy to answer this question because it's a very different. I can't say one answer to your question because it depends what is your livestock. So if in a herder society, if there are most of the family's livestock is horses, it's a very patriarchal family because the horses roam around much farther distances, and herding horses requires lots of toughness and riding far away, etc. So, and fighting with wolves all the time. So that really dictates a different culture in a family that the family man is much more important. But in a culture where cows are more important, if family possesses more cattle and cows, and the cow milking lady is the most important income bringing in the house, usually that family is matriarchal. So I grew up in a northern hoop school as a nomadic, in the nomadic herders, grandparents. Even so, my father and mother were teacher and technicians. I would always go to summer break to my grandparents, where their most important animals were cows. Every summer we would milk lots of cows, and we would, women would be most important person in the family. And in those provinces especially, woman is not so matriarch, but never patriarchal. So in general, in Mongolian society, women's role is very high. We have 70% of university graduates women, 90% of doctors women, 80% of lawyers women, 60% of engineers women, and teachers, maybe even 95% teachers are women. And we are having big trouble of bringing educated men into these sectors. And we're having a reverse gender gap problem. We are being blasted for being too unequal in these sectors. But there are two sectors where men are dominating. Of course, one is mining sector, where only 5% is women. And second, most men-dominated sector is politics. In politics, we just 2 years ago, in politics, we had only 3% women in high positions. Now, in our government, in our parliament, we have 12% women in the parliament and 15% women in cabinet, which is a huge success. Mongolia even received the prize for jumping up that fast, but it's still not enough, of course. So in the high political positions, still we are very patriarchal, but in the middle level government positions, 45% are women. So it's the society is very different. Even in the herder society, we can't say whether it's just matriarchal or patriarchal, because it depending on the animals, the community is becoming very different.
Yeah. What I find particularly interesting in that is how much is assumed by outsiders, like by Westerners or by people who do not know about the nomadic culture. And it's so easy for them to be painted as, living back in a time before radios, before TVs, in the middle of nowhere. I know that they have satellite dishes, they have generator-powered TV sets, they have radios they can listen. There's an internet cafe in Ulchi, and that's not so depicted in the film itself either. I mean, Chopin's never shown going into the Ulchi internet cafe or anything like that. We're walking through town texting or something.
Check her Gmail account, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and what I've heard, she's interested in texting, and it's the depiction of the people themselves is somehow primitive, with no knowledge of these things.
Right.
And so his depiction at Sundance, when he was saying that the men's attitudes were a byproduct of being geographically isolated, is spurious at best.
Right, coming out of the Stone Age.
Yeah, and I guess it's romanticized. It kind of increases the romantic factor of all those, back in time.
Well, talk about how Westerners anyway do have a tendency to make these kinds of assumptions.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, not that that's an excuse. Of course, it's not an excuse for making ignorant comments about a culture you don't know about. But,
well, of those ones that I said earlier, the real ignorant comments were, just kind of alluding to the women basically being imprisoned somehow out of chances for economic gain or to further their education and so forth. And I'll tell you more about that in a sec. But one of the things, for example, also that comment on the Eagle Hunter costumes being ridiculous by that one interviewer, I was, what? Are you kidding? They wear the product of their skill is worn in what they're wearing. Like, I'm a good hunter, look at me, what I'm wearing. I'm wearing this really hard to catch wolf or skin or even the hats are they have a certain number of fox legs, only the front legs of the fox to make these beautiful hats. That represents a lot of skill, because it takes a lot of time and energy and skill to hunt and capture these animals.
Absolutely.
So when you ridicule the so-called ridiculous costumes of the so-called pompous elders, who's being ridiculous and who's being pompous?
Right. Good point. Excellent point.
So, but Jan, I'd like to go and say and share one of the most important quotes that I found, which is from a woman named Lauren McGough.
Okay, Lauren McGough. Can you tell who is she, and can you give us all an idea about why you're bringing her into this?
Yeah, well, I wanted to find. I was lacking. What I was lacking was somebody who both spoke English and could communicate to me about the culture in terms of the attitudes of the men.
Okay.
Like somebody who'd basically been amongst them and had some perspective, but not like a rose-colored glasses perspective, but something that was informed. So I, through great chance and through great luck, I found this woman who's an eagle huntress, as it turns out.
Wow.
She started as a falconer when she was a young woman. She became, certified, and she has all the training as a falconer, and she actually lived amongst the Kazakh Mongolian eagle hunters for 2 years.
Wow.
And she first is a Fulbright scholar, and then for her PhD in cultural anthropology. What's your response in hearing this terminology? And her response is this, quote, "I would certainly argue against traditional Kazakh culture being called misogynist or chauvinist. The Berkuchi, in brackets eagle hunters, who I met cared deeply about their daughters. They valued education, and the family would work hard to find the funds to pay for university education for their daughters. They encouraged them to pursue careers in whatever interested them. And of course, taking care of the home is often the purview of Kazakh women. But I found that this hardly equated to suppression of women. Makpala Drazakova in Kazakhstan is an accepted eagle hunter, and though it's not common in the present day, there have been many through history. I find Kazakh culture to be a meritocracy." That's the word you were saying earlier, John.
Yes, okay.
Everyone is given a chance to pursue what interests them, and those who show aptitude are accepted in nearly any arena. So, the nature of the community is prove it and show us.
Good.
Show us the money, so to speak.
Yes.
Show me the money.
Right.
Not to say that chauvinist men don't exist in this culture. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything.
Right.
And what I've learned is that yes, there's some men that do not like the idea. But I would like to dig deeper into exactly why those females may not have the respect. Like that's a third part of what I'd like to talk about. Yeah, well, one of the greatest quotes was actually from Ysslestyne's mom. She was interviewed along with Ysslestyne and her husband, Ysslestyne's dad, in the early part, just before the family went to Sundance for the release of the film at Sundance. They were interviewed in Mongolia by a newspaper called Udrin Sonen, which translates to English Daily News. And a friend of mine, the same woman who told me earlier about the so-called boy role that the women take, she noticed this interview and said, "I'll try to get this interview translated for you." So we got it translated, and some of the quotes in that it was actually an interview. Sorry, it was dated January 21st, 2016 by Yanjma Batsuk, and Ysslestyne's mother was asked by the interview, "Is there anything that you were not able to do because of cultural restrictions or prohibitions for women? Have you ever thought of eagle hunting or hunting with eagles?" And she answered, quote, "No, I've never thought about doing it. But I let my children do whatever they want. I've never restricted them from what they wanted to do. There is no restriction in our religion or culture to prohibit girls from hunting with an eagle.
Wow.
If she wants to, and if she can handle it, then she can do it," end quote. I don't think that this perspective would be necessarily only Ysslestyne's mom. Obviously it isn't. There was the moms of Makpal, the mom of Akbo, the Bagashar, and so forth. But it just goes to show you that this filmmaker was saying, perhaps promoting something that where he had the answer or some insight that he was maybe ignoring right under his nose because it was Ysslestyne's mom. So.
Wow, that's well, you found out a lot.
Sometimes you find out things and you don't want to know, Jan, to be honest. You just want to just think that things have been done meticulously, especially from a documentary maker, because for my mind, documentary making is fact-based. That's what distinguishes it. It's researched.
And
it's
that
fact-based.
research better be meticulous.
I think so, because this is how we learn about our world, through documentaries. This is one of the best ways to learn about the world. And unfortunately, it can be pretty distorted sometimes. And that's basically what we're trying to get at.
That's when I think when it moves from the idea of a documentary into like just a movie.
Yeah.
just a made-up story.
That's a whole other story.
Yes.
Okay. So, you know, out of all this, I have to say that one of my favorite reads, of course, was the research that was actually seminal research by a Stanford University research historian named Adrienne Mayer, which we mentioned earlier in this video.
I've read her incredible research.
Included in this video earlier on. And so she, you know, she stated that Aisholpan Nurgaev joins a legacy of other female eagle huntresses in modern history and in antiquity, and explains how Aisholpan belongs to an egalitarian society, basically the meritocracy we're talking about, which means, you know, Otto Bell basically created his narrative to, and this is exposed further in her work as well. I am also very aware of the facts from, you know, I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but one of the troubling quotes that I found within her research was that the filmmaker, quote, to add a sense of dramatic conflict to his storyline, Otto Bell sought out eagle hunting elders in Mongolia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan who would express opposition to girls becoming apprentice eagle hunters. As with Makpal, most eagle hunters approved. So Bell's docudrama, she calls it a docudrama, the filmmaker insists it's a pure documentary, shows a humorous montage of old men frowning and shaking their heads. And actually, Jen, what I discovered subsequently is from the filmmaker's consultant himself that this footage obtained from Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan was never used. And my understanding is that it was actually Aisholpan's dad's friends who were the naysayers in the film, but they've never been named. And I don't really understand, you know, what exactly is going on there. But I do know that this filmmaker actively was seeking a male foil for his film.
Right.
And that is without a shadow of doubt provable in the communication that I have from someone who worked very closely with him. Enough said. We'll go back to what we were talking about.
I mean, now the last part of your statement here, you were talking again about the filmmaker's consultant, and if I'm correct, that's Dennis Keene, right? Dennis Keene.
That's the one.
Okay, all right. So you're talking about him, but so Dennis Keene.
Yeah.
Is the one that
he was a Fulbright scholar. He was a Fulbright scholar.
Okay, he's a Fulbright scholar, but he invited Otto Bell, the filmmaker,
that's right,
to interview Makpal.
But Bell declined it.
Okay,
that was in 2014.
Okay, in 2014, and we've learned, you know, since what's gone in. But didn't Dennis Keene? I mean, didn't he have anything to say about the culture?
Well, he did a story, which you can find, called The Internet May Love Eagle Huntresses, but the Eagle Hunters certainly don't. And it was dated April 19th, 2014. In that article, he was saying that all of the prominent eagle hunters that he talked to were essentially not liking the idea of female eagle huntresses coming on the scene. He evidently didn't know about Akbota Bagashar and how she was awarded by virtue of being the sole female participant at the Eagle Festival that we watched earlier. And his article is only centered around Makpal Drazakova and Aisholpan Nurgaev.
Really?
And how these girls, you know, how they basically, he talked about how attractive they were, freckled face Aisholpan or whatever, you know, and attractive. You know, actually his article on Makpal Drazakova, I believe he called her Eagle Hunter Babe. Anyway, he was quoted in that article. I'll pull out the quote. So, in regards the male-female role, in his article he said, especially in rural economy, household labor is rigidly split between men and women. This is like Kazakhstan economy. Men herd cattle, take care of finances, and have a greater luxury of recreation and hunting. Women herd children, take care of guests, and when free, sew or shop. The vast majority of Kazakhs don't live in yurts anymore. So again, he's talking about the Kazakh reality, the Kazakhstan reality. but they still provide a potent illustration of how codified this gender segregation can be. On the left side of the house was the female domain, and then he goes on to describe what's there.
Right.
And then on the right side of the house is the male domain, and he goes on to describe what's there. He says, to the strictest traditionalist, a Kazakh woman taking up an eagle is like a tornado whipping up this delicately ordered feng shui. It's a serious disturbance in how things are done. He wrote further that, quote, living according to the values of the all, I guess it's a district or township, I guess, and proudly promoting nostalgia, Central Asian falconers are almost preordained to be on the conservative end of the spectrum. And from there, the view of eagle huntresses is not a positive one. And what Mr. Keene says that I find quite interesting is the quote that, to the people that matter the most, the falconry community that guards the gates, these girls will continue to find little respect. And he went on to say this contrasts from how Westerners will feel about these girls participating. So essentially, it's
Wow.
again that narrative, leaving out the supportive men, leaving out the open men, leaving out the ambivalent men, and focusing only on these so-called gatekeepers, the prominent falconers, that these women will gain little respect. But I'd like to unpack that a little bit, because I think that's missing.
A whole culture's history. And
He wasn't comprehensive in this article.
Absolutely.
And he also, the way he wrote it was that,
what stands out for you?
Yeah,
What really stands out for you?
What stood out for me was just almost how it's written. First of all, men herd cattle, and then the next line, women herd children. And this is a little bit, just painting a picture in the eyes of the reader. It's a constraining picture.
Of course.
And how things are done, the delicate feng shui, that kind of thing, and essentially the gatekeepers and so forth. But he knew about Makpal being blessed by the elders, and so forth. And it's my understanding that he was aware of the research by Adrian Mayer that came later, actually.
Right.
So he hadn't done the deeper research, maybe more into the question of who's open, who's ambivalent, and so forth.
Right.
So this article, but moreover, when he talks about finding little respect, I think that's what I'd like to unpack some more, because I believe that that's where lies the difficulty here, because to really understand what does make someone, respected amongst the eagle hunters.
Okay, that's it, yeah.
Regardless of gender, whether it's a male or a female, what does make someone so-called respected?
Yeah, I just want you to, what stands out for you with the evidence you have found, whether it's through this person's article or this short little video by someone visiting the area, or somebody's, master's thesis, or
I found out, I've got an ever-growing evidence that there is, amongst the Kazakh nation, there's an openness, but also that it's, there's a difference between so-called true eagle hunters and showman eagle hunters, and they don't always cross over very nicely. But just going back to some of the evidence that seems to be.
Were there other sources that went out and talked to other
there was
hunters in different areas?
Yeah, I found a story by the ABC Foreign Correspondent. They did a story called "The Last Eagle Hunters," and it was published. So it was noted within that story, and I don't remember the date, but I think it was this spring that it came out. They noted that in a whole valley where the eagle hunters were in Western Mongolia, there were hunters that were not bothered by girls hunting, or with the concept of girls hunting, because when probed about why they weren't, bothered, one of the eagle hunters said it's because our greatest enemy is global warming, and how that's going to probably wipe out us, eagle hunters, because the eagles essentially need the food,
Right.
and without the crop or the herd animals to feed and so forth, it compromises everything. It compromises everything. So it's not on their radar as to be so upset about females engaging, right?
Interesting.
But there's other sources that I found, like, for example, in that same story, there's a 75-year-old man, an older eagle hunter, who said, he was questioning the laziness of the young boys. Why aren't the boys taking it up? Well, it's because, why would they not be interested? Because they're lazy. That was his thing, right?
Right, they're lazy.
But he also said, in the history of Kazakhs, there have never been an eagle huntress. So here's another person who's saying that there weren't any, but then the next family you ask, there were some, in history. So this older eagle hunter said that in the past, women didn't go up the mountain. They got married and moved away. But being an eagle huntress is a temporary thing. If that's not a slight, that's actually an observation. We don't have any evidence that women actually have participated beyond, say, their 20s or 30s. When they go off and get married or go off to college, or the men now, or the boys, they would be going off to college or join the army or so forth. It was merely an observation of this older man. And could easily be construed as, it's a short term, they're dilettantes. But in the bigger picture, they kind of are seen as dabblers. This is what I found out, because these old guys, they're at it for decades. Right? So, if you're thinking that there's going to be equal respect for an old, experienced hunter who has decades under his belt, for a young girl, let alone boy, or female, or male, that if she's only in it for 5-10 years max before she passes it on to the younger person in her family, she's not going to see the same respect. Why would she? That sort of... So how this respect is actually garnered, how is it? Is there a hierarchy? I think there is. So I went further and I asked people in Aishopan's local community, I wanted to find out, so what makes a true traditional eagle hunter?
Right. How is that defined?
Yeah. So what I found out in talking to them was really interesting. But before I go into that, I want to go back to some more evidence that I found about this. So I found an Al Jazeera news story called Winter Eagle Hunting in Kazakhstan. It was written in February 7th, 2012. And basically it talked about... there are a few elders who know eagle hunting with eagles, but it's now developing thanks to the help of the government and the citizens who are involved in it. And then an experienced veteran named Guqay, Guqay, in that same piece, he opined that on the involvement of Makpala Drazakova, and he said, it's not, quote, it's not exactly in keeping with tradition, but why fight it? In Kazakh history, women never used to hunt with eagles. There it is again, right? We can't stop her, of course. Let her be a hunter. And there's further evidence from Adrienne Mayer, who's that historian that I talked to. In her research, she noted that there was a champion eagle hunter who started learning at the age of 9, was born in 1933, and he remarked that there are very few eagle hunters during the Soviet rule, and he knew of no eagle huntresses. But, quote, in the old epics, he told them, quote, all the great women warriors were also eagle hunters.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. And also in Adrienne Mayer's piece, she said that, she noted that in one interview with Makpal said that she was given the elders, the blessing by the elders because, quote, they remembered that women used to hunt with horses, dogs, and eagles.
Wow.
So within Makpal's families and her elders had this memory of women actually having done it in the past as well. So you see, it's so confusing that some families know or knew about this previous female history, and others deny that it or do not know.
Do not know. So everything you just said, it just sounds like you've given us a lot of counter evidence. Now, with Dennis Keene, the consultant for Otto Bell, do you think he knew about Makpal, or do you think that he was unaware about Agboda Bagashar?
Well, I think he may have been, because she flew under the radar for most people. She was actually mentioned as an unidentified eagle huntress in the research by Adrienne Mayer. It wasn't until about several months ago that Daenerys Asanova, who was also mentioned earlier in this video, actually found out who she was, and she found an interview with her. She found this news article, or this news clip that we just watched.
Yeah, the Savim translated.
We didn't know her name.
Oh my goodness.
So, she wasn't easy to find. She's a treasure, but we had to uncover her. So,
wow.
Yeah, so that's really what's exciting about discovering her too. So anyway, getting back to this, as I said, I was asking, I was trying to understand. So what the heck? What is it about? What's a showman hunter? What's a true real eagle hunter? What's
We're
that?
getting back to the idea of
back.
respect. How do you? What is the idea of respect or validation as being a quote real unquote end quote eagle huntress?
Right. So it's underlying that inquiry. You have to understand that apparently the eagle festivals, though they're great for tourism and everything like that, there are some people who are really focusing on just having so-called purpose-trained eagles to fly at these festivals. Usually they're young eagles. They teach them to come quickly to the arm. They teach them to attack the carcass that's dragged behind the horse. This is all what would be used for training the eagle for real-life hunting.
Okay.
But they really, really focus on, it's like time trials, like getting it faster and making the bird really, really trained for that specific purpose. That same bird may not be, this is all the research that I've seen from various sources, is that same so-called festival bird is not necessarily a good actual hunting eagle. And one of my sources was Nancy Cohen. She's a falconer in the States. She did actually a YouTube video entitled "The Eagle Huntress at Red River Theaters, NH Autobahn on Raptors, Falconer Demonstration." So she had brought a bird in and she was answering questions posed by the audience after viewing the Eagle Huntress and talking about the film and talking about that distinction between the real hunting eagles, the traditional hunters, are not necessarily the ones that are populating the entire festival. Actually, I read in my research, and I can give you some resources in a minute, but there are men there who are more like eagle hunters, and they pose with the birds, and they try to attract tourism, tourists to come and stay with them and so forth. But also, a lot of those birds will attack other birds because they're eagle hunting. They're hunting birds are more aggressive. They're going to attack maybe other birds. They may not be interested in chasing what's dragging down the horse. After a certain point, maybe they've been caught in nets instead of from. They were already taught how to hunt. They're very effective because they're not caught from the nest. And so there's a traditional way is to take the eagle from the nest, but then they're also caught in nets with more experience. And those birds you can't necessarily find the talent of eagle festival eagle in the same bird necessarily, because it takes years of teaching that eagle how to hunt, and a lot of patience and a lot of time to make them a good hunter bird, right? So anyway. There
are eagles and there are eagles, but the eagles
and there's eagle hunters and there's
are apples and oranges, not apples and apples.
Not necessarily. And I guess in the hierarchy, I've also read in other articles that these traditional eagle hunters, some of them kind of object to the festivals because they weren't around. The festivals weren't around, and then suddenly, well, let me read a quote from one of the quotes I'd like to read you is from one of the papers that I found on the eagle festivals, and it's called Altai Kazakh Falconry as Heritage Tourism, the Golden Eagle Festivals of Western Mongolia. It was written in 2014 by Soma and Batulga, and then there's another article that's quite similar that was published in spring of last year, in spring of 2016, called When the Hunt is Over, Culture and Conservation in Kazakh Eagle Falconry by Nolan Ebner. and with a special attention on the subject of tourism and falconry and the conservation aspects. So from the earlier article that I mentioned, the Soma and Batulga article, the quote that I pulled out of that was really quite telling. It said, quote, "The recent massive change from hunting with eagles to demonstration eagle falconry," that's what we were talking about earlier, has driven a process of decontextualization, a disappearance of traditional arts and knowledge, the abandonment of hunting with eagles, the discontinuation of the capture and release custom, and the normalization of the process of buying and selling eagles and eaglets. In fact, most Altaic Kazakh eagle hunters have become eagle owners pretending to be authentic eagle hunters, but they are no longer involved in hunting, nor are they concerned with the guardianship of the natural world. So that's just end quote. So anyway, so you can see, I mean, I'm not vetting the truth of that research study, but there's definite crosses. Also, it's kind of reiterated information in the other article that I told you about.
Well, Megan, you know that video that you were referencing in regards to Nancy Cohen? I went on YouTube and I found it, so I think I'll just insert it here.
First thing I'll observe is almost every eagle you saw at that festival had the markings of a juvenile.
Yes, and I can comment on that. Let me tell you something. This is something else I discovered. The eagles in the competition are not of the tradition of the eagle hunters that stay out and don't go to the competition. And let me tell you why. If I had taken my Harris hawk up there and he was going to fly to me, he would have looked at it and said, "Holy crap, look at all those people and where's the game?" And any hunting eagle is not going to focus on something that can drag behind a horse. Not as well. You saw some that skied off. What is happening now is the competitions are a big deal. You notice that all those, there were a lot of foreigners, a lot of people with fancy cameras. This is a big deal. They are selling tours. My husband found them on the net to eagle country, to these competitions. So what is happening is they're taking the eagles very, very young, and they are practically imprinting them. They're really young birds, and they're working specifically towards the competition. It's something, you can't blame them. This is a culture that, how are they going to earn money? This is the most excitement they've had as far as bringing in money in any time. So the eagle hunters themselves, the ones that are more traditional, do not go for the birds out of the nest because those birds don't know how to hunt. They want a bird that knows how to hunt. It's the difference between a falconer taking a passage redtail and a redtail out of the nest. He's going to have to give some time over to that bird learning. So what they're taking, the real traditional eagle hunters are taking are second, third, and even fourth year birds. They know how to hunt, but they probably would be terrible in the competition. So that's what the difference is. You've seen a dichotomy here.
Just one follow-up. It seems to me that it was interesting that they say they keep them for 7 years, because if you think about breeding age of golden eagle, they haven't missed out on any breeding cycle until they're 6 or 7 years old. So I'm suggesting that number is not a random number, that they say 7 years. It's about the time the eagle would be of breeding age anyway. So actually that's good. In a sense, that's good wildlife management. And I think Nancy would also tell you that the birds don't ever lose their drive for hunting. So the question is, will they find a spot in the environment to fit in and have a territory? So I'll stop there.
In effect, this is all adding up to who respects who and why.
Right.
And I know also from reading the research of a man named Palani Mohan, he studied the last remaining Altai Kazakh eagle hunters for a period of 5 years. And he said of all the eagle hunters, which may number up to like 350 or so, in quotation marks, eagle hunters, or new eagle hunters, or eagle festival eagle hunters, he said only about 50 or 60 are true, traditional, real eagle hunters. Okay,
Wow.
so that is a dying breed of person.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And the bar is held very high. So getting back to what I was saying before, when I asked the locals in Ysslestyne and Nurguy's community how they define what constitutes a real eagle hunter, what I was told is that you'd have to be at it year after year. It's about 5 years to apprentice.
Right.
You'd have to be at it year after year after year, successfully hunting. You may have to learn the behaviors of different eagles as you go through your career. You handle different eagles, maybe having more than one at once.
And prey patterns, I would imagine.
Learning about the actual animals that you're hunting. And even making the accoutrement of, like, say, the ball deck that the eagle sits on, and making the hood for the, it becomes almost a craftsman as well as a huntsman in terms of understanding the prey. On top of, and what's most difficult, I understand, is learning how to correctly feed the eagle so that it maintains its interest in going after prey, because apparently it's a fine balance. It was really interesting to hear about that.
Do you know any more about that? About the eagle care?
Well, this is actually mentioned by. I read it more deeply actually from Dennis Keane, the Audubell's consultant.
Yeah.
He wrote about it also, and I wish I had grabbed that quote from him, but essentially he said he surveyed eagle hunters and asked them what is the most difficult aspect of this art to learn. And universally it was learning how to, to feed the eagle and keep it hydrated properly in order for it to be, going after prey and effective. And he said, there's no scales out there on the stip. You have to kind of weigh the meat in one hand kind of thing, and then have the eagle in the other, and try to figure out that so-called balance within the bird that would make it motivated to hunt. And that takes, a long time of trial and error. Like, it's not learned within a period of 6 months. It's not so easy.
Is there an issue with over or underfeeding an eagle?
If you overfeed it, it becomes lethargic and unmotivated to hunt, and maybe even slow or slower flying. And if you underfeed it, then it has to be strong enough to attack, because it's a fight to the death between the prey, and sometimes the eagle loses, right? So the bird has to be strong enough. So obviously it weakens the bird and makes it less effective against the prey, because these, they can get killed.
Right.
Fox sometimes wins,
Right.
Wolf certainly sometimes wins.
Wolf sometimes wins.
Yeah, and some people won't even hunt against wolves because of the danger towards their birds of hunting and so on. So, getting back to that hierarchy we were talking about, what makes these guys respect? Is it any surprise that these, Makbab Drazukula or Ysslestyne or any woman or any man would not necessarily get the so-called respect of these older hunters? It would take a lot to impress these gentlemen, a lot, because of the level of involvement in the art.
Right, years and years
of dedication, right? So not many people get to have that moniker. And what kind of disturbs me is what I saw in the Sony Pictures Classics Student Study Guide for the Eagle Huntress. I think I showed this.
I actually, I read what Sony was sending out to the educators of the United States. I'm not sure if it made it to other English-speaking countries like Canada
and
or
Australia.
UK or Australia.
Well, first of all, Audubell really wants his film to be a so-called evergreen film that's shown, for decades in the school system as a way to talk about gender discrimination.
What?
As a way to talk about, a tradition being overcome and fought against, female empowerment, blah, blah, blah. So, so when they go to describe Ysslestyne, what happened was they called her, quote, having reached the, quote, pinnacle of the tradition.
Okay.
So the pinnacle pinnacle by definition, Jan. Can you help me here? It's like the best. It's like the top of the game.
It's like
the Uberman.
planting your flag on the top of Everest.
Right, the pinnacle. And Chopin is described as such by so many pictures classes. Now, I'm going to shoot straight to the hip, but what the heck?
Right.
What the heck is going on here? I can just envision a bunch of executives sitting around a boardroom table deciding, we really need to sell this girl. Let's make her the best. Let's make her the pinnacle. To hell with actually what it actually takes to reach the pinnacle.
Yes, I was looking and I did find this great TED Talk by Palani Mohan, and he did talk about someone who had reached this stature. Here he is.
So this is a portrait of Ozar Khan and his beautiful great-granddaughter Nazgul. Now, Ozar Khan is the oldest, the wisest, and the greatest of all the eagle hunters in the land. A living legend of sorts. He's 94 years old. He's tall, he's handsome with broad shoulders, and he's got hands like sandpaper. He's gone blind in one eye, and his once keen hearing is all but faded. He hardly ate anything anymore, and he missed his wife dearly, who passed away over a decade ago.
I mean, even amongst those higher echelon of hunters, there are men who are within that higher echelon, even higher, you know, so they know who the grandpapa of everything is, in this case. The person who's hung in there the longest, has the most successful hunts under their belt, has done the most and understands the prey behavior, can read the health of the eagle, is like a quasi-veterinarian for the eagles, and, you know, has all of this going for him. That guy, or, you know, if it's a girl, then fine. But if that guy, that person, is going to be the pinnacle. Not a 13-year-old who, God bless her, was at the festival and came away with a trophy. You know, don't go there with me, please.
Okay. At this point, I won't.
So, but, you know, a 13-year-old at the time and having some successful hunt afterwards, and then she gets promoted as having reached the pinnacle. And having competed against, quote, all the greatest hunters at the festival. So that is actually a misrepresentation of the Eagle Festival and of Chopin Nergaev. Point blank. There is no other way to say that that's actually true. I mean, if you were to actually sit Chopin down and say, do you believe you're the best, you're at the pinnacle of this art? I doubt that the girl would say yes. Or the young woman, I doubt that.
She or even any of her family members would
probably
think that
not.
She was not. Was the
and
best.
Certainly not her community, from what I hear. Like, from what I hear, this is not happening. So, you know, I just wanted to point that out, that, you know, it's one thing to have what I feel is an ethnocentric student study guide. Like, within that student study guide, they don't even really go into role-based culture and the needs and stuff like that. I want to talk about that further too, because that's, you know, what the next subject really is to talk about, I think, is the is role-based culture, and like what the questions have been missed. It seems to me that in order for this culture to be seen as truly like advancing itself, there have to be an equal number of women and men engaging in eagle hunting, which I think is a fallacy. If you actually look at how many people actually make a living from eagle hunting, it's a small, probably a very small percentage of those 50 or 60 so-called true hunters that are actually making their living from selling the furs.
Interesting.
Most of the people, my understanding is that most of the people engaging are doing it as a hobby. Most of what they do in their so-called real day jobs are herders. They're herders who do eagle hunting when they have some pastime and hobby, and or just the outdoor enjoyment. As Chopin's own father said, some people make a living for their children doing, I guess, selling the furs. But other people, and I think it's the majority, are doing it more as a pastime, as a hobby. Is like, let's get out, boys, let's go hunting and go in the hills, or girls, whatever. Let's go. So, to me, it's not an important question, but that's like sort of saying, in order for something to be respected as modern, that there has to be the outward appearance of everything being equal. That there has to be an equal number of girls and boys, men and women. And I think that it's kind of, it's sort of an imposed idea on the culture itself. Like, so your question to me is, do I have theories? I have theories because through all of this, I'm thinking to myself, Jen, honestly, you've got, first of all, just by way of background, my understanding what the culture, like why it is, what I'm told is that it was a rite of passage for boys.
Right.
That it was passed from father to son because it was a rite of passage idea. Only certain families would have an eagle hunter because, like, if you had enough herd animals, and it was like almost an elitist thing, like you had the resources, and you know, it was at one point connected with the elite. I mean, even before pre-Islamic or influences, we're going before that time frame. Eagle hunting was happening as well. So connected with animism or shamanism or so forth. These men had a really important role. For example, in Dennis Keene's article, it's not article, but his research thesis paper, he mentioned how there would have, like in the birth of a child, there would be an eagle hunter present to sort of as a good omen blessing for this event. And they would go so far as if the actual eagle hunter wasn't around, they'd get his glove, the arm protection leather mitt that the eagle would hold and have that present, or some artifact present at the birth. So therefore these men had a high role in the society. They were seen as connected to that. So, you know, this has evolved through time, through different belief systems and everything else. So everything gets shifted around, depends on politics, as we know with the communism and so forth, the Soviet years, tourism, you know, belief systems, everything kind of changes and evolves over time, right? And it costs something to keep an animal. It's like a family decision. So it's not open and available to everyone. And even Eshelpan's father has said that, you know, this is within eagle hunter families. And I've read elsewhere that maybe it's a neighboring boy to an eagle hunting family that might be involved. But essentially it's a smaller and smaller and smaller group of potential people that traditionally would go. It was usually within the family passed down, right? So, but now you kind of get the impression it's like if girls want to do it, it's like joining a soccer team. If you show a desire to do it, then you should just voice up and get up and do it. But there are certain constraints, you know, within the culture.
Well,
so,
of course.
At least there have been to date. Right? So, my own theory is that just looking around, respecting the culture's decisions and why they make the decisions they do over time. And keeping in mind that sort of idea that women and men have to kind of work together to get through these harsh conditions. If a party of men had to go off hunting, it's minus 40, somebody has to stay home and take care of the babies. Somebody has to keep those fires going.
Well, obviously, I mean, it's not like they can go down the road to the daycare, you know, that's just right around the corner, drop off the kids. And, yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So, you know, that's the reality is that the women would have a very important role to keep things going.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, theoretically speaking, these gears are not like 30 feet by 30 feet. They're small areas. It's minus 30. You're stuck inside this gear with your get out of my hair. Go hunting. I don't care. I'll stay home with the babies. I'm okay with it. So, but, you know, it's really interesting. Through all of this, Jan, I haven't found one study or one case study that shows that interested females who are interested in eagle hunting were actually, you know, actively supprely from
or
doing it.
Ostracized from their family members or
there's no oral history that I've heard where there were actually actively interested women who are actively suppressed. So the assumption is that just by virtue of there not being many females doing it, that there has been some huge dominant suppressive thing going on. So it's too simplistic. It's brutally simplistic. And I think that when I think about the student study guide and about this whole idea of Aishalpan Nurgai of being sold as an emblem of somebody overcoming sort of challenging tradition, you have to understand the tradition and why it's evolved the way it has, what the exigencies are of the role-based culture, what the needs are. I mean, we don't even know how many pelts did they need to catch. How much food did they need to catch? That may have shifted over time. You know, so there are many. That's what I'm saying when I said when I started off with this. There's so many unasked questions. or even if you're a documentary maker, I think you have a responsibility to really uncover and turn over rocks,
Right.
And look under rocks and see. Maybe people don't want to talk about the Soviet era and how that affected. Maybe that's politically something you don't want to go near, right? Plus, this filmmaker, in the film itself, the filmmaker kind of alludes to the fact that this festival has been going on for centuries, and it's only been going on since 2000. He doesn't talk about like the number of actual Eagle Hunters that actually attend that festival. It doesn't go into any of that detail. It's all like the best over there, or and it's been going on for years. It gives the impression, it's a false impression, and it's actually there are possible negative outcomes with this increase in tourism. I mean, they're already writing about it. We could say, to keep it short and sweet, that it is a responsibility. Documentary making is a responsibility. To inform the public, it's a way in that people may never go to Mongolia or never know about the Kazakh culture, but I would hate to think that they learn only about through the media marketing and what's come out of it.
Okay.
And
would you say that there's also responsibility for people that call themselves film reviewers to know all the facts before they write about a culture?
Certainly I do, because it's just part of cultural sensitivity, let alone any sort of, talking about racism or talking about ethnocentrism. I think it's not adequate to go on the review before you or what's written before you and just parrot and sort of go deeper and say uglier and uglier and uglier things. I find that objectionable, actually, and laziness. I don't know. As I said, I don't know these people's backgrounds. They may have just thought that this person said it must be true, and they didn't. But I think research. Put on your thinking cap if you're going to make any comment that even vaguely touches on another culture. Screen it for how your own perceptions are flavoring things, right? I mean, some may turn around and say, Megan, you're all like rose-colored glasses. There's been other Eagle Hunters, no repression. No, that's never been what I've said.
Right.
What I've discovered is that there are some open, some don't care, and some actively don't like it.
Okay.
So it's never as simple as it seems. And to try to inform the public through a documentary is a huge responsibility, because it ends up, in the end of the day, and the reality on the ground, there are outcomes for all decisions that go into documentary making, right? It's just like you especially in a small community, right?
Well, and especially in regards to ethnocentrism, I mean, we touched on it just very briefly, but if we go back to Sony Picture Classics, okay, and they put out that student study guide.
Yeah.
What do you hope that teachers?
Oh gosh.
Yeah. In regards to
teachers. Oh my goodness.
We've addressed the filmmaker. We've addressed.
Partly
the filmmaker. We've sat here. We've addressed the people that are the reviewers of these films.
The teachers. At the end of the day, if this is going to be so-called evergreen film, I'm thinking that teachers need to look at other evidence about this culture and to have access to it, and they'll have to look for it. So my hope, Jen, is essentially that the teachers do their homework before they just toe the line of whatever's being told. This Sony Classic Pictures Student Study Guide doesn't even cite the seminal research of Adrienne Mayer. Probably because she mentions in her PDF, some dubious filmmaking practices. However, even setting that aside, she's got such a rich knowledge and having gathered information and data about the Eagle Hunters and the openness or about the fact that they exist. Women of Kazakhstan have put together an Eagle Huntress exhibit that they hope to do again, and so there are people trying to counter the messages of this Hollywood film. It's now a Hollywood film. So the teachers have that responsibility, I think, towards their students to really dig deep. And I hope that they find this video. I hope that they listen to this video. I hope that they have a really provocative conversation with their students and reflect on the ethnocentrism and reflect on the bigger pictures. Like, what is it we're learning here? And is it true what we're learning here? And to what extent is it true or not true? And these are all really important things and a responsibility of the teachers. I think it's a quite limiting study guide as it stands. And I just hope that people can be supportive of Daenerys Asanova and her female eagle exhibit. I mean, Daenerys herself, I want to quote from her, it's better for the story of the culture to be coming from within the culture as best as possible. So what she said was, quote, "From what I can see, the filmmaker of the Eagle Huntress seems very unwilling to acknowledge the existence of other female eagle huntresses within modern times or in antiquity in Kazakh eagle hunting culture. I guess it was one of the filmmaker's marketing instruments to use gender stereotypes, but in my opinion, it distorts our history and culture. Therefore, Section 2 of our exhibition should be considered our civic response to the marketing strategy of the Eagle Huntress documentary. We really want the world to know that eagle huntresses were present and are present now. Not many of them, but still." I'll keep it at that.
Wow, that's great. Meghan, thank you so very much for your time today. This is Jan van Ysslestyne here, and I just got an email from Meghan, and she said that she had just come across some amazing new news in regards to the eagle huntresses of Mongolia. So I'm going to give her a phone call right now and record the next part of our interview together. And so I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say as well.
Hello, Jan.
Hello, Meghan. Got your email, and so I thought I'd give you a call, and I'm glad we were able to prearrange this time. So can you tell me about this incredible news you were talking about that you just came across?
Yes. Okay, so I'm not sure if you're really following what's going on in Western Mongolia in terms of the Eagle Festivals. But apparently there was a new one this year. And it's called the Almacook Golden Eagle Festival, and it's there's an association called the Almacook Golden Eagle Association, which runs it. And so have you heard of it? Or
No, I haven't. Okay. But I know that there are new ones that are coming up all the time. So.
Well, yeah, I don't know how many. As far as I know, there might be 2, maybe 3 other ones.
Okay.
But this is a new one that just ran for the first time this year. And basically, I'll try to be succinct about this because I know they can speak at length at times. But this woman, the manager of this Eagle Festival, is also a tour operator, and she's operating in Bayanogi province, which is in Western Mongolia. And she has there are several people that know my name somehow and are kind of, because I've been there and they've seen that I've been writing about Western Mongolia and the Eagle Huntress film and so forth. Some people have a kind of passing knowledge of who I am or what I've done, and then other people know a lot. And anyway, I've had some tour operators say, "You've been here, how can we improve our business?" and and so forth. So this woman hits me up, and her name is Asal Nabakan. And she is, as it turns out, one of 2. There's only 2 female tour operators, and she does English translation. She's a teacher in the wintertime, and then she has this tour business. It's called Hearing Birds Fly, right? And I'm like, wow, that's a pretty name, and so forth. And I'm looking on her site, and it's really around truly teaching about the culture, because she lives there. She's from this village called Ulankhus, spelled Ulaankhus. Anyway, she hits me up. I look, what she's doing, and made some suggestions on her website, how it appears or whatever. and we're back and forthing, and she and I are chatting, and I'm like, you know what, I'm trying to collect sort of information on these young females who are now taking up eagle hunting as inspired by Chopin, or maybe not by her, but just trying to find out what inspires them, what their intentions are. Are they going to be demonstration falconers? Are they going to go on and with their apprenticeship to actually try to be so-called real eagle hunters down the line? What's their aspiration? When do they start? Who's teaching them? That kind of thing. She said, well, I know several of the girls. In fact, I know a lot of eagle hunters. She actually really, she's got her fingers deep into the eagle hunting community, and so much she knows a lot of the older eagle hunters and so forth. And she is managing this association, as I said earlier, about this eagle festival. And the man who started it up, his name is, I gotta look at my paper here, Dalutka Jama. And he's the leader of that association and so forth. And apparently the location is a traditional spot, and it was like suggested by an elder eagle hunter and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, that's really cool, and tell me more and so forth. So as we're chatting, I'm like, so what does Almacook mean? And she's like, well, that's the older Eagle Huntress lady's name.
What?
There was an older Eagle Huntress lady,
really?
And I'm like, okay, so I'm like, what? Tell me more. Like, how old is she? How, do you have a photo of her? Could you send that? When did she start? How long has she been at it? Just the same kind of information as I'm trying to seek for the younger ones that I'm hearing about, right? So she says, well, no, she's long dead. And I'm like, okay, so I'm starting to get this sort of chill down my spine, thinking, what are you talking about, long dead Eagle Huntress? And she's like, well, she died a long time ago. I could send you more information on her. We're collecting that right now. I'm like, whoa, okay, yes, send me information. So as it turns out, this woman was alive in the 19th century, and the early part, she died in 1929. And the story that she sent me so far, and the details she sent me so far, it's an astounding story of this woman. It's absolutely fascinating.
It sounds incredible.
And, well, I don't want to get into too many details because it's not my story to tell.
Okay.
I can help with editing, which I've offered to do for free, keeping everything true to everything, and send it back to them, and they do what they do with it. But what I've seen of this woman's life story and how she came around to being an eagle huntress, and it is astounding. Like, she had that hill was named after her, and she was a respected eagle huntress, respected by the other eagle hunters. The male eagle hunters respected her. And I'm like, the details I can't get into, but the story is absolutely riveting. So I'm thinking, like, this is just blowing my mind, right? And I just feel so privileged to be setting eyes on it, right?
To have a hill named after you, that's a huge honor.
Well, apparently because apparently some elder eagle hunters were suggesting, or one or more of them was suggesting that location was the place to have a festival, because it's a traditional spot. Because it's an excellent ground for not only hunting with eagles but also training. Traditionally for training them, and so that's. I mean, I as I say, I can't get into the details because it's not my story to tell. But I'm just flabbergasted, and I'm that's news.
That's amazing news. Now I want to know, and sorry for prying, who is going to get the story? What are these people going to do with their own oral history? And what are they hoping you're going to be able to do for English-speaking people that would like to know about the story?
Well, as I said, I'm going to be offering editing of the facts that they send to me and putting it into, she already sent me the story, and she writes very, very well. It's just a matter of shuffling around a word here or there, or a spelling correction or a punctuation correction, and then just double checking the facts as they're given to me, and making any clarifications that I need to get, because I can see through the eyes of a Westerner what kind of questions might arise, so that I can, see what's the last name of this person, what was the eagle's name, and, kind of, how long did she stay with it, and so forth. So those kind of questions I'm writing up and sending to her, and then she's I mean, they're still in the process of interviewing the descendants of this woman, and older Eagle Hunters, or whatever the older Eagle Hunters can remember, double checking with the family descendants of Alma. Her name's Alma. Right. So, I mean, that's the part that I've somehow, somehow now I'm into this, like, to help with this, and I feel so honored and deeply, moved that I find myself in this spot. So
that's incredible. And with this new association, and they're offering trips, we should put some information up at the end of this video to let people know, if they want to contact her, where they can go to, and how they can get in touch.
Yeah, I do want to help her, of course, and just I can send you. What I'll do is I'll take a snapshot or a photo of her, of her company name, and the whatever description is in the front of that, and then also of the Eagle of the association, and then. What I do know is that she is sincerely interested in sort of like approaching things from an educational culture sharing point of view, and their festival is really going to focus on showing like true real eagle hunters who have a lot of hunting experience, and then if the people that are showing our demonstration falconers are in their apprenticeship phase, and they're more than ready to distinguish that, so that tourists know what they're looking at and so forth. And they've also done something really, really special. So they this year they did a eagle release, a release of eagles as part of the festival. Wow! And she's got some amazing ideas that they're going to be really trying to distinguish themselves as a eagle hunting focused festival. So educational, and really neat, some really neat experiential kind of thing.
Well, thank you very much for this amazing news, and I, for one, look forward to seeing the story at some point when it comes out. Oh, you won't believe it. I mean, it's just so rich. Wow. It's such a rich story, and so culturally informative, and the fact that she was honored as a real, honored by the other eagle hunters, and has a hill in her name. Pretty incredible.
I think kind of speaks to many things that we're talking about in this video. So I think that what's exciting is that this story is of Alma is essentially it's a history story of a woman whose existence may very well have been subsumed by this Hollywood juggernaut, right? So of the Eagle Huntress. So I'm very excited to support in any way that the actual history is protected and
brought out into the light.
Yeah.
Okay.
So John, I'm going to keep it simple like that, because I can go on and on and on. So thank you for calling me. I just wanted to let you know that update so we can include it at the end of the video. And just also please let people know that I have intentions to create a website whereby I'm going to be helping to create some sort of place where people can see both eagle huntresses and the Kazakh eagle hunting culture.
And what's the name of the website?
It's eaglehuntresses.com.
Okay.
Simple. And it's still in progress. I'm still working on it. I've got too many plates in the air right now. So one thing by one thing. And thank you for giving me this chance of recording and also your questions and following along. So
and well, thank you for the update. It sounds exciting.
Yeah.
So thank you again.
You're welcome.